Okay, this will be the flow of my presentation. Of course, the introduction, and number two is the impact of COVID-19 to indigenous peoples, and the third one, I guess I could no longer tackle this because I'm only given 10 minutes to um, give you this presentation. Okay, next slide, please. Anyway, okay, shown are the 7 ethnographic regions where the particular ICCs or IPs are found. Here also is the projected IP population using the 2007 annual population growth rate of 2.16% provided by then National Statistics Office or NSO. However, based on the DSWD data, the number of IP beneficiaries of SAP or amelioration program for fiscal year 2020 totaled to 20 million individuals or 750,000 families. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, shown are the 4 bundles of rights. That is the right to ancestral domain or lands, the right to governance and empowerment, the right to social justice and human rights, and of course, the last is the right to cultural integrity. Um, However, nakalagay po sa 4 bundles of rights na yan, yung mga specific rights na nakikita po natin, maabot po yan ng 36. Okay. Next slide, please. So ito na po yung impact of COVID-19 to indigenous peoples. COVID-19 pandemic affected all people globally and influenced all walks of life. Of course, ICCs and IPs included. Next slide, please. Okay. We all know that since time immemorial, ICCs or IPs are resilient. However, they too are and were and still are affected by this pandemic. There are several effects on the health of ICCs and IPs, both positive and negative. So makikita po natin dyan sa positive, bayanihan and other indigenous practices are being observed to control the spread of COVID-19 virus and mitigate its effects. Adherence to local community guidelines adopted by community elders or leaders. Then maximize the practice of IKSP on health. IPs use local goods and herbal medicines to strengthen their immune system. Practice of rituals while observing the precautionary measures. Supported to quarantine, isolation, since it is similar to the practice in the past of placing those who are suffering from infectious diseases in a place akin to a quarantine isolation facility. Okay, next slide, please. So makikita po natin dyan na many IPs maximize the use of their herbal medicine, yung sinabi ko kanina. Information on COVID-19, increased health awareness. IPs became aware of this disease, including the preventive measures like social distancing, wearing of face masks, etc. Next slide, please. Total of 481 IEC or Information Education Campaign on COVID-19 and COVID-19 Vaccination Deployment Program reported to date, conducted by NCIP independently and or back-to-back with other NCIP activities and in coordination with partners. There is an increasing number of IPs willing to be vaccinated based on the quarterly reports of the NCIP regional health focal persons. IEC materials translated to IP languages by NCIP regional and field offices, then access to health services, adopted new ways of consultations, teleconsultations, call, text, video call, etc. The interagency coordination in the delivery of services, increase in numbers of IPs receptive to the vaccination deployment program. Some health workers are from the IP communities themselves, hence understand the culture of the community and there's trust. The ICC's IPs protect their own communities and voluntarily work at checkpoints and quarantine isolation facilities during the ECQ or enhanced community quarantine and lockdowns. Next slide, please. Indigenous knowledge systems and practices on health. Some IPs disregard IATF issuances and guidelines, especially during death of relatives. Some IPs observe the sanctity of their cultural practices and go on performing such amidst restriction on this time of COVID-19 pandemic, such as some have strong beliefs of the Anito or divine intervention. IPs do not practice cremation. IPs observe longer period of wakes, performing rituals necessary before burying their dead relatives. With explanation, understanding, acceptance is underway, hence some traditional practices are no longer practiced. There are still IP communities not reached when it comes to IEC or relied on social media, hence don't understand and tend to believe what other people say, even fake news. Hence, many refuse vaccination due to fear of the side effects. Next slide, please. Access to health services. There are IPs who have other illnesses but hard up in accessing health services due to several factors like geographical location, no means of transportation due to several lockdowns, no resources to be used, fear of going to health facilities because they might get infected and others. Some IPs have poor access to health services, especially during pandemic, and some refuse to seek medical help in fear of having COVID-19 positive result. And then fear of going to health facility resulted to low number of health consultation among IPs and unattended health condition. Others, physical inactivity and poor diet, leading to weight gain, metabolic diseases, etc. Okay, sorry, I
So
was muted a while ago.
that means you have 2 minutes left for Director, sir.
All right, no problem. Next slide, please. So education, the positive effects are number one, relationship with families became more close parental monitoring on the learning process of the children, and then parents were able to assess the needs of their children in their studies, learn more about social media as tool for working and learning. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, no COVID transmission, educational institution due to distant learning platform as modular or online class. Next, please. Ito po yung mga negative. Some IP's parents are illiterate. Normally, yun po yung kadalasan, karamihan. Hence, they cannot assist their children in their modular learning. Then students stayed at home and they became bored and pressured with their modular studies, for which some lead to depression. Next slide, please. Disruptions to the usual learning scenario of students due to the adjustment of the new normal. Few were able to avail distant learning, online class due to lack of ability to acquire the needed gadgets. Of course, bottom line is that mga IPs po kasi, most, if not all, no, do not have the resources, the logistics, or the financial capacity to buy gadgets in order to cope with the okay, next slide, please. So parents who did not attend to school are hesitant to enroll their children because they cannot tutor assist their children. So karamihan ng IPs, wala rin pong hindi nga po nakatungtunan ng high school or elementary. So paano nila i-assist? So I guess my time is up. Am I right? Ang bilis.
Yes po, Director.
Okay.
That's 10 minutes na po, Director Serna. But Director
Yeah.
Serna, there's
Okay.
still time po during the open forum for you to elaborate on the points na hindi po ninyo na share sa presentation. Pwede niyo naman pong ihabol
Okay.
sa...
Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat po.
At any rate,
pasensya
you will
na.
be given a copy of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So our thanks to Director Ferdowsi, Serna. We really apologize for the limitations of the time. Pare-pareho lang po talaga na 20 minutes ang na-allocate natin sa bawat set of respondents po. No? So at naghati po yung NCIP. We appreciate the data that you shared, Director Serna. Lumalabas na sa Mindanao, parang IPs would account for 8.20% no, of the population. So that's something that we should remember. No? Susunod naman po magbahagi sa atin ay si Ma'am Carmelita Basbasan de Silva. Ma'am?
Yeah, good morning. Am I heard?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you, ma'am.
On this fourth day of our celebration for the Kusog Mindanao, I would like to greet the honorable men and women who have come to the point of having this organized for how many years for our people. Especially to the chairperson kanina na nagsabi sa akin kung paano nag-umpisa. I was happy to see the honorable men of all around the Philippines who have been involved in this. So let me please start with my presentation. It's about the climate change and how the ICC take it, respond to it, and how do they motivate it. So next slide, please. I have summarized the content of my presentation with the four major aspects. We have under the introduction. I will try to read the answers to the questions that were thrown to us. What is the legal basis of NCIP's programs in climate change and environmental sustainability? How are the IPs described in the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2012. This is the law for NDRRMC. And number two, we have the vulnerable IPs or ICCs. It calls here that who are the most vulnerable ICCs? Why are they considered to be among the most vulnerable? And what are the predominant forms of natural disasters in these most vulnerable areas? Number three deals with the IKSPs of the IPs that are being observed or that has been there since time immemorial, the ways on how they deal with the disasters, the ways on how they mitigate, how they prepare, and how they try to cope up with it. Number four, the resilience and recovery of resilience and recovery. What are the elements and coping up mechanisms found in our ICC? These are the ancestral domain where they stay. Next slide, please. Next, please. Based from the IPRA, Rule 7, Part 6, Section 5, that states that to assist ICC's IPs and coordinate disaster and relief operations in ICC communities affected by natural calamities, disasters, or catastrophes. This particular section of the IPRA, I was given live after having experienced the Yolanda surge and the Yolanda disaster, the very, very sad experience of the impact of Yolanda. So by then, that time, that's around 7 years ago, being the focal of the disaster program of NCIP, I have decided to gather the little experiences and relate this to the ways and means on how the IPs, where I come from, have also been dealing with the disasters in their lives. So that anchored on this particular section, which is the mandate of our bureau, when I was able to come up with the program entitled DPMP, Disaster Preparedness and Management Program. This is also supported with the experiences that I have gathered for the past years, coordinating with all the interagency task forces and PWGs dealing with disasters. Next, please. So, next, please. Indigenous peoples in their ancestral land or ancestral domains. Under this, in the ancestral domains and ancestral lands, there are so many factors coming in and coming out of the ancestral domains, affecting both the lands, the people, the culture, and the other fundamental practices of the IP. So that in this particular page, you will be able to see that environmental hazards, the vulnerabilities of IPs are listed here. Under capitalism, it says here that the presence of wealth in terms of untapped indigenous resources within the inclusive and vast ancestral domain have been used and abused by greedy and wealthy capitalists, resulting to the degradation and destruction of the environment amongst the lands and ancestral domains of people. Under the environmental hazards, today on account of hazards in any form, these ancestral domains suffer the most damage brought about by the earthquakes, for instance, are made more immeasurable when aggravated by these hazards such as floods, erosions, swollen rivers, fires, etc. The vulnerabilities of IPs are made more prominent because of and it produces the loss of lives, damages to properties, public facilities, natural resources end up into a disastrous stage. Such a situation brings to prominence then the indigenous people's vulnerability in an already difficult life. Next, please. Under this, this is just a sample of what the DPMP had been doing during the last 3 years. This is not complete, but since it is a sample, I just came out with the available data that is with me right now. If you will see the donut chart, the yellow one has a 32.5%, and that goes to Region 2. Region 2 has become the catch basin of all the dams, all the waters that comes from the upper streams, from the Cordillera, from the upper streams of Region 2 and the other nearby provinces. So that in the past 3 years that we have had very minimal amounts of funding, we tried our very best to immediately respond to those who are in need on emergency situations related to natural disasters. Who are the most vulnerable IPs or ICCs? Why are they considered to be the most vulnerable? And what are the predominant forms of natural disasters in these most vulnerable areas? So if you would see, you would notice that it is only Region 12 that has been included here. And since it was that time in 2018 when some areas were submerged or some areas were affected by the sudden surge of water, then our regional offices immediately coordinated with us. So, pero hindi po ito lang ang ating mga nagawa. Sample lang po ito, marami din po lalo na ngayon. Napakarami po ngayon ng nakafocus na programs ng NCIP with interagencies sa Mindanaw. Meron na po tayong mga partnership with agriculture, with DA. There are some projects also that are funded by foreign funds. And inaayos na po ngayon yung implementation ng ating NCIP in coordination with the next slide, please. The indigenous knowledge systems and practices. The IKSPs of the people, the IPs, refer to systems, institutions, mechanisms, and technologies comprising a unique body of knowledge evolved through time and embody patterns of relationships between and amongst peoples, between communities, etc. Mga kapatid ko, alam ko naman po na alam nyo ang IKSP, ang climate change resiliency ng mga IPs ay nakaangkla po doon sa kanilang mga katutubong pamamaraan para malaman kung meron mang mga sakuna at meron mang mga pangyayari na darating. In fact, the interrelatedness of IPs with their environment is so connected that they are inseparable. This IKSPs refer to the practices that they still have to do and what we are trying to strengthen now. Next, please.
Ma'am, pwede po mag-wrap up na po kasi last, time's up.
Last 2 minutes po. So, okay po.
I'll give you, no ma'am, I'll give you 1 more minute. Actually, nag-10 minutes na po. So, 1 minute na lang po to wrap up.
So, please proceed to the last page. Pwede paki-ano na. Yung susunod po. Yan, okay. So, resiliency and recovery for the IPs, I just want to read this particular paragraph that I have written. Madaling araw po kanina. So, have indigenous communities only become more vulnerable because of the challenges that come with enhancing resilience and recovery struggles. Pumasok po sa aking isipan na isulat ito at ito po yung content. Most of the initiatives being introduced in partnership with IPs are successful, while some are not as progressive, non-linear. Thus, this is due to the multidimensional issues and concerns not limited to climate change. Development per se has made them face-to-face with wider views and various standards, thereby strengthening the resilience in them. The key, however, is in formulating and implementing policies that are in tune with how they, the first stewards of our planet, define development. Yun lang po. Salamat po ng marami.